In the shimmering world of billionaires where marble mansions rise like castles and luxury cars line endless driveways, one truth remained hidden. Money couldn't silence fear. Behind velvet curtains and golden gates lived a young girl drowning. In anxiety, a silent struggle no one could fix. Doctors tried, specialists failed. Her father's fortune couldn't buy her peace. And then, a woman appeared. A nanny, different from all the rest. What began as a simple job would soon unravel into a story of love, resilience, and a quiet battle against prejudice that would change everything. Amelia Harrington was no ordinary child. She was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in America, a billionaire, whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and headlines. The Harrington estate was a fortress of wealth, sprawling gardens, private pools, shimmering chandeliers, and walls decorated with priceless art. To the outside world, Amelia lived the dream every child could only imagine. But behind her delicate smile was a storm no one could see. From an early age, Amelia struggled with overwhelming anxiety. Crowded rooms made her tremble, sudden noises sent her heart racing, and sleepless nights left her fragile and withdrawn. Her father, Richard Harrington, did everything money could buy. He brought in the most renowned psychiatrists, therapists with Ivy League degrees, and private doctors who promised miracles. Amelia's room was filled with expensive gadgets meant to calm her, but they only reminded her of how broken she felt. Her anxiety wasn't just an illness, it became a prison. Despite her golden cage, she felt trapped, unheard, and unseen. Her father's fortune couldn't hug her through the panic, nor could his empire of influence silence the restless thoughts that haunted her nights. Staff members rotated in and out of the Harrington mansion, each claiming to have the answer, yet leaving without making the slightest difference. Then, one afternoon, a new figure stepped into the mansion. She didn't arrive in a polished suit or with prestigious credentials. She was a black woman in her 50s, carrying only a modest bag and a presence that felt different from all the rest. Her name was Grace, and though she had been hired simply as a nanny, she was about to step into a role far greater than anyone had imagined. Grace's arrival at the Harrington mansion was quiet, almost unnoticed. To most of the staff, she was just another caretaker, a replacement who, like the others, would likely come and go. But Grace was different. She didn't see Amelia as a patient to be fixed or a problem to be solved. She saw a frightened young girl whose wealth had not shielded her from the fragility of human suffering. On her very first day, Grace entered Amelia's lavish room. The curtains were drawn, despite the sun outside. Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The air was heavy, filled with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Most adults before had rushed in with their methods, their checklists, their therapeutic commands. Grace did none of that. She sat gently on the carpet, her hands folded in her lap, and whispered softly, "You don't have to talk to me. Just breathe." At first, Amelia resisted. She turned her face away, expecting another adult who would eventually give up. But there was something about Grace's presence, a calmness, a steadiness that made Amelia curious. Over the next few days, Grace continued her quiet routine. She would hum soft melodies from her childhood church, read stories aloud whether Amelia responded or not, and sit patiently in silence when Amelia could not speak. Slowly, a bond began to form, fragile but undeniable. Yet, within the mansion's golden walls, not everyone approved. Whispers spread among the staff. Some looked down at Grace, questioning why a billionaire's daughter should be entrusted to a black nanny with no prestigious qualifications. In private corners, subtle remarks were exchanged. "She doesn't belong here." How could someone like her handle Amelia's delicate condition? Even Mr. Harrington, though polite on the surface, quietly doubted whether Grace could offer anything of real value. Still, Grace persisted. She taught Amelia grounding exercises, showing her how to press her hands against the floor when panic surged, to remind herself she was safe. She encouraged her to draw, to let her feelings spill onto paper when words failed her. And in the garden, Grace and Amelia began to spend long afternoons together, While Amelia used to shrink from the outside world, with Grace, she dared to touch the flowers, feel the breeze, and even laugh at the playful chirps of birds. The change was subtle but real. Amelia's nights grew calmer, her mornings less clouded. She smiled more. She spoke more. For the first time in years, the mansion echoed with the sound of a child's laughter. But the prejudice lingered. One evening, at a formal dinner with wealthy guests, Amelia surprised her father by choosing to sit beside Grace rather than him. Gasps were audible as the billionaire's daughter leaned into the nanny's shoulder, whispering softly when her anxiety started to rise. Guests exchanged disapproving looks. Later, Mr. Harrington was confronted by a business associate who sneered, "Is this really the company you keep for your daughter? A child of wealth relying on her?" The unspoken word hung heavy in the air, race, class, and judgment intertwining into quiet venom. For Richard Harrington, this was humiliating. His empire was built on power, status, and appearances. To admit that his daughter found comfort in a black nanny rather than the best specialists money could buy felt like weakness. His pride clashed with his daughter's fragile progress. And so despite the clear bond forming between Grace and Amelia, doubts began to poison his thoughts. Grace, however, remained steady. She had faced prejudice before. This was not new to her. What mattered was Amelia. And though the mansion's golden walls held whispers of doubt, Grace knew that healing was never about wealth or appearances. It was about love, patience, and being truly seen. What none of them realized yet was that Amelia's greatest test was still to come. And when it arrived, it would force everyone, her father, the staff, even the doubters, to see the truth about who Grace really was. It was a stormy evening when Amelia's world finally shattered. Dark clouds gathered above the Harrington estate, thunder echoing across the sky. Inside the mansion, guests filled the grand hall for a charity gala, dressed in glittering gowns and tailored suits. Richard Harrington moved among them, his polished smile hiding the tension he carried. Amelia had been persuaded to attend, though the crowded space was her greatest fear. At first, she clung quietly to the edges of the room, her small frame nearly swallowed by the sea of glamorous adults. But then the music swelled, conversations grew louder, and the laughter of strangers crashed against her fragile senses. Her chest tightened, the walls seemed to close in. In seconds, her breaths turned shallow, her hands trembled uncontrollably, and her eyes darted desperately for escape. Whispers began to spread as guests noticed the billionaire's daughter collapsing under invisible weight. Some rolled their eyes, dismissing her as spoiled. Others smirked cruelly, muttering about weakness. Richard froze in the center of the hall, paralyzed. All the wealth, all the power he had gathered over decades, none of it could stop his daughter's spiraling panic. And then Grace appeared. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the disapproving stares, ignoring the hushed insults directed at her presence. She knelt beside Amelia, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the chaos like a steady heartbeat. "Breathe, baby. In, out. You're safe. You're here. Nothing can hurt you." Her hands enveloped Amelia's trembling fingers, grounding her against the storm raging inside. With each whispered rhythm, Amelia's frantic gasps slowed. Her racing heartbeat steadied, and in Grace's arms the girl finally collapsed, not from fear, but from relief, as sleep overtook her trembling body. The room fell into stunned silence. For the first time, every guest, every skeptic, every whisperer saw what Richard had refused to accept. It wasn't money, prestige, or titles that saved Amelia that night. It was Grace. The woman they dismissed, the presence they questioned, had done what no one else could. And as Richard stood frozen in the glittering hall, he realized the truth. His daughter's life had been transformed not by wealth, but by the love of a woman the world had tried to overlook. The night of the gala changed everything. After Amelia's breakdown and Grace's quiet triumph, the whispers that once carried doubt turned into stunned silence. No guest could deny what they had witnessed. When wealth and prestige failed, compassion prevailed. Yet, for Richard Harrington, The moment struck deeper than humiliation. It was revelation. For years he had poured his fortune into treatments, programs, and specialists. He had built walls of marble to shield his daughter from the world, believing luxury could erase her pain. But standing in that glittering hall, watching Grace cradle Amelia as though she were her own child, Richard felt a truth he could no longer ignore. Healing wasn't measured in wealth but in humanity. The following weeks saw a transformation no one expected. Amelia grew more confident under Grace's care, not because her anxiety vanished overnight, but because for the first time, she felt seen. She wasn't treated as a fragile burden or a medical case, but as a little girl whose fears were valid, whose struggles were real, and whose life mattered beyond her father's billions. Grace gave her tools, breathing exercises, grounding, techniques, small acts of courage. But more than that, she gave her love. And still the world outside the Harrington estate whispered. Some questioned why a billionaire's daughter would be so deeply bonded to a black nanny. Others cast it as a scandal, a tale of misplaced trust. But Richard no longer cared. He had witnessed something no critic could erase, the undeniable power of Grace, both the woman and the word itself. Over time, Amelia's story became more than just a tale of wealth and anxiety. It became a quiet reminder of the racism that lingers in whispers, the prejudice that hides behind polite smiles. Grace had faced it in the mansion's halls, in the judgment of guests, in the doubts of her employer. Yet she met it not with anger, but with steadfast love, proving that dignity and humanity are stronger than hate. For Amelia, the nanny who walked in carrying only a modest bag became her anchor, her healer, her safe place in a world of gold and glass. And for Richard, the lesson was clear. Money could build empires, but it could never replace the strength of a woman who chose compassion over everything else. As the years passed, Amelia grew, not free of anxiety, but stronger in the face of it, and through her journey she carried one truth that defined her life. That sometimes the people the world underestimates are the ones who hold the power to transform it.